Welcome to our talks on the spirituality and parenting. I'm Father Doug Lorig. I'm a married priest, which you're probably not going to run into very often, so I should explain that because I'll refer to my wife and children from time to time in the talks. I'd like to introduce my daughter, Heather. Heather is a wonderful mother, and she and her husband do a wonderful job raising their children. She's very patient, so I'd like you to hear her.
Thanks, Dad. My name is Heather Lorig, and I am the mother of 7 children. Jesse and I together have 4 biological children in our home, and then we have 3 adopted children. Our oldest child is adopted. He's Jonathan. He just turned 13, has autism and a couple of other disabilities, but mostly seizure disorder, some education issues and whatnot. Tabitha is our 11-year-old. She's also adopted. She has cerebral palsy and autism and educational struggles as well. Jayla is 10 and she's a biological daughter. And Axon is 9 and he's a biological son. Abigail is 8. She is adopted and she has a hearing impairment and some short stature issues and medical issues, but nothing that affects her education except the hearing impairment. And then we have Madison, who is 7, and she's a biological child, and then Dion, who is 5. He'll be 6 next month, and he is a biological child as well. Dion has some medical issues that we discovered, and he's none the worse for any of them for having gone through what he's gone through medically, which has taught us a great deal of patience with dealing with his situation. I was raised in a home where patience was everywhere. I saw it with my parents day in and day out. A lot of things that start with being patient and being patient in parenting is you have to see it and you have to have that modeled for you. If your parents didn't model that for you, then as an adult you learn it and you model it from other people. Being able to see it and see it firsthand, and I didn't know any different growing up in that environment. That's just what I saw all the time. I saw my dad with a great deal of patience in his everyday life, dealing with students at school and then people at church and whatnot, and just different situations. My mom, I watched a great deal of patience with her when she worked with her students in the classroom. Another thing I saw with her growing up, one of the memories that a very vivid memory I have is when we were 8 years old and my dad had bought my sister and I a pony for our birthday, and we were those little girls that had a pony, and we were the envy of everybody on the street that we had this pony, and he was old when we got him, but we didn't care. We rode him every day all over the place and just loved him to death. His name was Midnight, and about 2 years later we'd ridden him nonstop, and they said, you know, you need to stop riding him, so we'd walk him everywhere. And then one day he got really, really sick, and the vet came out to the house and said he's not going to make it, he's going to pass away, and wanted to put him down. My dad said, no, we'll just let the girls, play with him a little bit more, and when it's his time, he'll go. And he got real, real sick and laid down in the middle of the yard. My dad let him out in between our house and where the stables are into the backyard, and so he was out there and eating and kind of, messing with the grass and whatnot. And he laid down and wasn't getting back up. And so it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and my mom went out and laid with him. And my mom's not an animal person at all. Like a cat here and there, but that was it. She does not like animals. And she went and sat down in the backyard, and she had his head in her lap. And my sister and I sat out there for a while with her, and then a storm started to blow in, and she had us go in. And we laid down on the floor in front of the sliding glass door and watched. And my mom sat out there all night with a blanket around her and a blanket around Midnight. And the thunderstorm blew in, and I watched and watched and watched, and she was so patient with him. She didn't call the vet back out. She didn't do any of that. She laid out there with him, and he passed away in the middle of the night. And we got up the next day, and the vet was there with a big Hoyer lift moving him. And my mom came in and didn't say anything, and we were just so shocked that she was so patient that she laid out there and loved him like we did and took that good of care of him. And that, to me, was a big lesson that I think back on now when I'm waiting and getting impatient with something. that I saw what patience paid out for my mom in the lessons she taught us about caring for animals and treating animals like they're part of your family. As I grew up, I also learned what impatience would get me. Being impatient gets me speeding tickets. Being impatient with food. Cooking gets me food that's raw, that's not cooked right, and that sort of thing. If I'm not patient with the ingredients I'm putting in, then it does not turn out the way it's supposed to. Impatience gets you things faster, but they're not always right, and they're not always what's best. And so I've learned, kind of watching that whole environment, that you really need to be patient and wait for things to happen. And that is something that you really need to see before you can even do anything with it. While the next step is learning it and then putting it into practice and doing it and kind of testing it as that goes. When you're learning something new, you really have to do a self-check of yourself and figure out where you're coming from. What is my baggage? What is my starting point, and where do I go from there? I need to check in myself and see before I approach somebody where I'm at with stuff. If I've had a really hard day at work and I turn around and have to then deal with my children when I get home and what their day has entailed for them, it's very difficult sometimes to do that and to take that 5 extra minutes for yourself to get yourself to a point where you can be patient. The self-check is always the first step in that, so that you are not reactive and whatnot with your children or with people in your life. When my dad first asked me to do this talk and I started to think about what I was going to do, I thought, well, I don't know that I consider myself a very patient person. I got to really think about that. And so I started to think about that and pray about it when I got up that morning and kind of just thinking about it. And I got a phone call from the adoptions worker for one of my children. And she said, basically, that there was an issue with their Social Security and he needed to get down to the Social Security office to speak with this investigator right away. So I dropped what I was doing, got all my documents for her and went downtown Phoenix to the Social Security office. So 40 minutes in the car, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll go talk to this person and then I'll be on my way. She's 8 years old now and I've had her since she was a baby. It's not a big deal. She's adopted. I have everything. Get down to there, and then I got all the way upstairs. There's no elevator. There's no parking. It was like one thing after another that was just testing my patience. And I get into the room, and there's 80 people in this room, and there's maybe 4 benches for people to sit, and every window was full. And I get my number, and my number was 198, and they were on like number 4. So then I thought, okay. So the more and more irritated I got all day long, I kept thinking, okay, patience. You get what you ask for, and I asked to really learn, okay, do I have patience? And the entire day was like that. It ended up being like a 9-hour expedition down there. And by the end of it, it all turned out well, but I asked for, God to show me, okay, that I have patience, and he, tenfold showed me exactly why it is that my dad felt like this was a good talk for me to give. One of the biggest things that you look at with being patient is you have to look at who's in front of you. Am I dealing, and what they're coming with, but what baggage they have, where things are with them. I know that I have to approach my 13-year-old son, who's autistic, who really looks for things to be in a certain order and things to be set out for him, differently than I approach my 10-year-old daughter, who doesn't have those difficulties and those challenges. And she's more emotional, and as she gets older, my 10-year-old's more attached to her dad and really looks for his approval. And so I really need to watch what I'm doing and working through that with them. One of the biggest challenges with parenting is dealing with children who make poor choices and have poor behavior. And that translates also into when I work with adults. When I work with adults every day at work, and I deal with surgeons, and sometimes I have to talk to them about their behavior. And one of the big pieces of my job is going and talking to surgeons about, if they've made inappropriate comments or they've done something, and I really need to go have them understand what that means and what the ramifications of that are, much the same as I do with my children. And not that adults are children, but you have to deal with it the same. You look at the etiology of the behavior of the person that's standing in front of you. Why are they doing what they're doing? Where is that coming from? I have a very hard time believing that any child does something, has a certain behavior has a malicious intent behind it. A lot of times it's that they want something or they need something or there's a perceived need, and they're not setting out just to be mean and vicious and nasty to somebody. I really struggle with even believing that that's possible from a child. Adults are more capable of making those types of choices. And so we look at, okay, where is their behavior coming from? What need are they trying to meet with that behavior? And what do I need to do with it? And what is patience requiring of me? With my children, I watch them and say, you know what? You're getting frustrated because they can't do something. And, or I'm waiting for you to figure out and learn that certain lesson. And a lot of times it takes a very long time, and that's where the patience comes in, where you just need to wait, and they'll figure it out, not as quickly as an adult would, but they'll get there. And so some of my children take a little bit longer than others who catch it very quickly. So you have a learned ADD that comes into play, where you just distract yourself with other things until you can come back and go, okay, now where are we at on that? Where have you gotten to? You can't be patient if you're just sitting and waiting. Most people that are extremely patient occupy themselves with other things that they're doing, and then they come back to what their initial task was and look at that person or that child and go, okay, where are we at? What do you need from me? Here's the next step, and this is how we move forward. You remove the reactiveness to that, and you really focus on, again, that person that's in front of you and what need they're trying to have met. I know some children, it's, they miss their mom and dad and they really want that affection, or they've had a hard day at school, or something you'll never know. Somebody said something mean to them and now they're reacting, or they feel like they can't get a certain task done, that it's not within their abilities. And that's very hard for them. When my 11-year-old, who's got cerebral palsy, when we first got her, they brought her to us as a hospice baby. They said she's 6 weeks old, there's nothing we can do for her. She came through foster care, and the caseworker called me and said, I need you to come pick her up. I can't get her out of the car, I'm terrified of her. She had all sorts of machines, and they expected her to die within maybe a month or so. And I was hesitant because we did not do hospice foster care. And it was 5 o'clock on a Friday, and they needed this, and so I thought, all right, I can do this through the weekend, and then they'll find a place that's more suited for her come Monday. And over the weekend, we got extremely attached and said, all right, fine, apparently this is our calling for right now. And so we had this newborn baby who just needed everybody for everything, as the babies do. But you could see a little bit of just a fire in her that wasn't going away. And so they said, well, we expect her to pass in a couple of weeks here. And so every time I took back to the doctor, they said, well, anytime now. But then she started to get better. And over the next 2 years, she got a lot better. She still wasn't moving very well, but she was kind of out of the woods. And I kept taking her back going, all right, now what do I do with her? Because, you said she wouldn't be here, and she's here, and she needs more things. And so with her, the things that children who are born without those difficulties, when they start to meet milestones, it comes a lot quicker than it does for a child with special needs. And so there's a great deal of patience that goes into that. One of the biggest things we struggled with her was her mobility. They said she'll never walk, she'll never crawl, she'll never be able to go anywhere, she's going to need to wear braces. And so they had fitted her for all these braces, but she was so skinny that it was very hard for her, and they weighed more than she did. And so I'd take her to my mom and dad's house, and we'd have dinner, and I'd put her on the floor and put toys in front of her, and would put them just outside of her reach, and she'd have to reach and move just a little bit, and she'd get a hold of them. So I'd let her have it for a minute or two, and then I'd move them again. And she'd get so mad, and she'd bury her face and yell, and then she'd get back up and crawl a little bit more. And by, within an hour, she'd made it 4 feet, which 4 feet in 1 hour doesn't seem like a big feat, but for a child that was never supposed to be able to do that, it's a huge thing. And my mom would sit there and watch, and she'd have to walk away because she'd get so teared up watching her. And she'd just want to give her the toys, but it was one of those things that really, taught her lessons. And so now I've got an 11-year-old that I can't keep off of things. She runs, she plays, she climbs, she plays tetherball. It is not coordinated or pretty, but she's doing it. She knows how to ride a bike, and she gets down the street and rides a bike, and they said she'd never do that. So for me, the patience in being able to sit and watch her do that and really build that strength in her was a big thing, and I had to distract myself with other things that were going on in order to wait for her to meet that next step and to get to that next point. Another part of that is that our own biological child, it's a little bit different when you're dealing with adopted children versus biological children. Our biological son, normal pregnancy, normal everything. He's our youngest, and he's definitely the baby, and he knows it, and he runs the house. When he was 10 days old, he was throwing up like crazy and had to go in and have this emergency surgery. And then it felt like every month after that we were back in the hospital having all these surgeries. And by the time he was 13 months old, he'd had 16 different surgeries, all to keep him alive and keep him where he was at. And we'd lay in bed at night and just stare at the ceiling, not sure what to do or where to go, and sit back and had to pray. And the more, when I approached my dad about it, I said, what is this? Why is this happening? And he said, just be patient. There's a lesson in it. God has something to show you. And I really didn't care at that point what God had to show me. I wanted my son to feel better, and I wanted him to not have to be in the hospital. And he ended up, by the time he had just turned 2, and we learned that he had cancer in his eye. His eye wasn't tracking as well, and I had said something, and the doctors were like, no, I don't see it. And sure enough, when I finally got them to look, they had this issue. And so we were sent to another state, went and saw a specialist there. They said, his eye needs to come out. We need to get it out now so the cancer doesn't go to his brain. And, went into this whole downhill spiral of what to do with him. And I just sat back and thought, what's next? But I also knew that we'd been raising children all along with all these sort of, difficulties and challenges. And so I needed to be patient and know in myself that we'd be able to handle that. And, we eventually learned that, they removed his eye, and he's got a prosthesis now and learns things like every other kid without the being able to look at something in 3D and being able to see dimensions and things, because he's just got the one eye and all the challenges that come with that. We also learned that the doctors made a mistake, that he didn't have cancer in his eye, that they'd mixed up some pathology reports, and that had not been disclosed to us until much later, after he'd gone through chemotherapy and some other treatments. And so there came a time when we had to decide if we were going to do something about that, if we were going to sue for his future needs and this and that and the other. And we decided that what we were going to do is reach an agreement with the hospital that there were certain mandates and policies and systems put in place to prevent that from happening to another child, that we were able to deal with him, and whatever had happened for a reason. And if it prevented another child, us being aware of it prevented that from happening to another child, that's what we needed to see. It took a very long time for those processes to get in place. We had to be very patient with it and patient with the bureaucratic process and whatnot. In the meantime, raising this child that didn't need to have the struggles they were having because of an error that was made that wasn't his fault. But now I turn around and I look at him and all the things that the doctor said he wouldn't be able to do. Well, because we took his optic nerve, he doesn't have very good balance. He's not going to be able to ride a bike like other little boys. He's not going to be able to, play baseball and play soccer and play basketball. And he does all those things now. When he turned 4, he wanted to learn how to ride a bike. And so I talked to the doctor about it, and he said, his balance isn't going to be good. He's not going to be able to do it. And I said, well, I've heard that before. And so we put a helmet on him, and off he went. And within a day, was riding that bike up and down the street. And now he's up, he's almost 6. He's up on curbs, and he's another one I can't keep down out of the trees and off of the side of the house. And he plays soccer, and he catches and throws a football that they said he couldn't do because he wouldn't be able to see where it was at. And he really has learned patience with himself. He doesn't get frustrated like a lot of children do. When he's gone to school, they expected him to be really frustrated with the things that he couldn't do. And they said he's one of the most patient kids we've seen. And that was a good indication to me that I did the right thing, that I showed him how to not become impatient with himself and to really watch what he was able to do and really keep a check on that and move through that process and be patient with getting himself to where he needed to be. And that moves into to teaching what patience is and modeling that for your children. It's very hard. It's very hard to sit back and think as a parent what your children are seeing you do and how they're seeing you react. And every parent laughs when their child says something, "Oh, that sounds like your dad." Well, it does, because kids watch everything. They watch how you react to each other as parents in your relationship. You think that your relationship happens behind closed doors and that kids don't understand grown-up things, but they do. They understand if I get impatient with their dad, if I get frustrated with something he's doing. They watch my face, they understand, they see it. And so I need to really keep a check on that and make sure that what I am modeling for my children and for everybody else out there is what I want them to learn. You are what people see, and that's a very difficult thing to learn. I've had my moments of modeling something for my children that I don't want them to ever repeat. If I'm going to do something, I want it to be something that that I wouldn't mind my children doing. So that's, even when you're in the car and you're driving, that's the biggest thing I've realized, is that children know everything. If they can sit in the car with you, and my 6-year-old knows how to get us home, he knows how I'm reacting to other drivers. And more so when people cut you off and what you do with that. Do you just slow down? And we pull up to the school and they'll notice somebody waiting on the side of the road, and I can look in the mirror and see that they're going to wait and see if I'm going to let that person in or not. Or somebody that's cutting in line, that there's a big line to get on the freeway and they come up and then they turn their blinker on to get in, or cut somebody off. And what you verbalize out loud, also your body language and how you respond to that. That's a big missed piece of education that a lot of parents don't see with their children. Is it's 90% of what you do and how you do it, and only 10% of what you say. Your children are going to learn all of that from you. You have to be patient with cooking, with teaching them how to cook, with waiting for them and learning, helping them learn things. My 9-year-old wants to cook everything. He wants to be in the middle of it, but he can't crack an egg without getting eggshells in the mix to save his life. He just can't. And so every time I wait and go, okay, he's going to do it this time, and sure enough, there's eggshells in it, and so I'm fishing him out, and I have to be very patient with him and say, okay, actually we need to do it this way. Remember, we showed you. So now I've moved to, okay, we're going to put it in a bowl and then put it in there. Well, then he's got eggshells in that too. So he's getting there. And then he gets kind of impatient with himself. And if I allow him to get impatient with himself and not really bring him back, and say, it's okay, it's not going to hurt anything, we're just going to move on. That's something that you really, it's a really big lesson to teach your kids, that you don't even realize you're doing it. All those daily things that you need to do with them really teach patience. I need to, be patient with my daughter with cerebral palsy when she brushes her hair in the morning. And it is the most horrendous thing to watch, but I have to be patient and wait for her to do it. And if I always do it for her, then she'll never learn how to do it herself. If I always just carried her around and did everything for her and fed her, she wouldn't feed herself now. She wouldn't do her own hair. She wouldn't, take her own shower. There are certain things I need to help her with that she's not learned how to do yet, and that, that's the patience piece of it, is that she's getting there. The biggest thing with parenting is really being, self-aware of where you are and what you're doing and how all of your actions affect your children and what it teaches. Even in, like when we're in church and there's somebody in front of you and you're going to communion and they're moving really slow, or it's taking them a little extra time to get up, the way you deal with that and model that for your children tells them a lot and shows them a lot. And if you stand and wait patiently and do your thing, it's going to cost you nothing because you're there, but it will model to your children that acceptance and that it's okay to have to wait and to not, that immediate gratification that's such a part of our society now, that you move away from that, moving more towards what's really necessary and do I need it right now, and really looking at that with them. I came from a place where patience was always modeled to me when I was growing up, and I saw that a lot, and I didn't really appreciate it at the time. Now that I'm a parent and I'm having to do it myself, I really appreciate the things that my parents took the time to do with us and to learn. I didn't necessarily understand it at the time, but now I do, and I really appreciate what that has done for me with my children.
In my work as a priest, I've been in parishes where there were predominantly young families with lots of children. And I'm in a parish now that is older. Most, I think the largest number of people are older people because of the area. And it doesn't matter where you are, every single one of the parents that I've encountered, old or young, they want the best for their children. I think that this is like a universal. They don't want to do it wrong. They don't want to give their child some kind of heartache that they're going to have to spend years getting over with. The truth is we don't always know how. I think some parents, that the lament that I hear the most is from the older people. And they tell me I was too strict, or I demanded too much. I didn't give enough love. I didn't put enough love in it. Isn't that interesting? I wonder if other priests have the same experience. They look and their children aren't going to Mass. Their kids are raised and having kids of their own. They're not going to Mass, many of them. And they feel they failed something. And they don't understand that kids sometimes will do that they'll walk away. They won't go to Mass. And then at some point in their life, they want to, and they come back. And we have to leave lots of room for mistakes, lots of room for God. It doesn't all work according to the book. But I think this series, the reason we did it, was to give people who are going to be parents, especially those preparing for marriage, those preparing to have their first baby or even the second or third, those who are wanting better tools. We just really want to give you some things to think about. It isn't a manual on how to raise your kids. And it certainly isn't a doctrinal manual on how to teach kids the Catholic faith. That's someone else's job. This is reflecting on how you bring your children into that arena where the Holy Spirit wants to produce fruit. And these 9 fruit of the Spirit that we've been pointing to, that's the fruit He wants to produce in the soul of your child. So God bless you. I hope and wish every good gift for you as a parent.